Stewardship Fund. You can look them up on the internet. It did not end well for those guys. This was a company that I worked for from, I want to say I started with them beginning of February of 2005 all the way through the end of May 2008. I was with them for about 3 years and 4 months, 3 years and 5 months. They were a real estate company that bought distressed properties off of a broker that was in contact with many asset managers for some of the largest banks in the United States. Deutsche Bank, Bank of New York, companies that held a lot of real estate paper, mortgages, that bought mortgages on the secondary market. The United States went through what's called a subprime fallout in 2007 and 2008 because lenders had issued mortgages to many people that weren't capable of paying them over the long run. These mortgages were done on 2-year arms where the mortgage would be fixed for 2 years and then it would adjust, the interest rate would adjust to a 30-year, actually a 28-year fixed mortgage. And in most cases, and this actually happened to us, the mortgage rate shot up like 2 or 3% over after those 2 years were up. And people were going into foreclosure all over the country. There were markets in the Northeast where all of the manufacturing had been shuttered over the years, and many of the companies through NAFTA had gone down into Mexico, or companies with manufacturing had been shipped overseas into China. And we were inheriting and purchasing distressed properties, distressed assets off of a lender that was in contact, or actually a broker that was in contact with some of these banks. And when I say distressed, I mean, I'm talking about Detroit, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Allegheny County. I have to tell you, I had no idea that places like this existed in the United States. I had no clue that Detroit was as bad off as it was. I had no idea that Flint, Michigan was as bad off as it was back in the early 2000s, 20 years ago. I had no idea that Gary, Indiana even existed. I had no idea that Indiana, outside of the city of Indianapolis, was going bankrupt. So this company hired me in the first part of February. And on the day they hired me, they also hired another lady to oversee all of their sales closings. She had a title background in the title industry, and so she understood real estate contracts and closings. She understood that side of the business. And they hired me in as a sales rep for the entire Midwest, from Maine all the way down to Kentucky, all the way over to North and South Dakota. I had the entire Midwest all the way up to Canada. I think it was like 15 states. I'll have to go back and count. They gave me a sales territory in this part of the country because they were starting to buy so many properties, so many distressed assets, that they had to bring in another sales rep in addition to the one they already had, which was a guy I went to church with. The guy that owned the company, that was the CEO of the company, was the same elder that I talked about before in previous videos that I had personal favor with at South Point Church. He was the son of a well-known real estate family in the Dallas area, and I considered him to be a friend. We were on good terms. He was older than me by about 10 years. But he called me up one day and said, would you come to work for me? Now, this was in the first part of 2005. And I had been told by the Lord that I would be in the real estate industry for 7 years. I had gotten out of the management business with the Olive Garden. I'd started flipping properties and I started doing remodels. And I was about almost 3.5 years through this 7-year period. And I hit a lull for a couple of months where I didn't know what to do because I noticed my business was slowing down on the flip side and on the remodel side. And I said to the Lord, Lord, I know you've told me I'll be in this business for 7 years, but I don't know what to do because I see what I've been doing. It seems like it's coming to a stop. What do I do? And there was just this pause for about 60 days. And then my phone rang. And it was this elder from South Point Church. And he called me up and he said, what are you doing? And I said, well, actually, I'm seeking God for my next step because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. And he said, well, I've got a spot open with my company. We're going to expand. And I need a guy that has a background in what you've been doing to come in and take over some sales for me in part of the country. Would you come in and interview with the president of the company? And I said, sure, I'll come in. So I set up an interview that week and I went in and met with the president, the guy that worked directly beneath him. And they offered me that job. I don't remember if it was that day or the next day. And all of a sudden, just out of nowhere, I found myself working for Stewardship Fund and I'm back in the real estate game. And on that day that I was hired, they hired this other lady that we're going to call Kim. I'm going to write this down. That's not her name. They hired a woman alongside of me named Kim to work on the title closing side of the business. And we started on exactly the same day. We attended the same office. They had a big office meeting the day we were hired in. They took the existing employees and they took she and I, and then we had a big office meeting on the new structure of the company and how things were going to work out operationally and how we were bringing in the closing side in-house and all these things that were going on. And everything was fine to start. Everything was going great. The first 30 or so days, I took right to it because it was kind of a hand-in-glove situation for me because suddenly I found myself selling distressed assets, the same type of assets that I had been working with privately to some degree for the previous 3 years. So I understood what this company was doing objectively, and it made it easy for me in the sales aspects of it because I understood what we were buying and I understood what we were trying to sell. We were buying these properties for pennies on the dollar in packages, huge packages of properties that would be spread out over about 35 different states around the United States. And then we would sort them based on state, and these properties would be assigned to whichever sales rep had that state. So again, mine was in the Midwest, and everything was going great. Tons of properties were coming on the books. We were busy. And on one particular day, I had to go into Kim's office. Kim was our new closer, in-house title closer lady who oversaw all of our contracts. And I went in to talk to her about something relating to a particular contract. And I don't know if it was what I said or how I said it or how she perceived what I said, but I knocked on her door. I walked in her office. She gave me permission to talk to her. And something triggered this woman. I don't know what I still to this day cannot remember what it was. Something set something off in her, and all of a sudden she just started screaming at me. Like, I mean, snapping and like she was stressed and she was over. She just blew up on me and started yelling at me, and telling me she was too busy, or I don't remember. It was like a bomb went off out of her mouth. So I dismissed myself from the office, and I walked through the hallway and around back to my office. And remember, we shared a wall. So the other side of my wall was her office. And I remember she was still screaming and yelling and hollering after I left her office. After I walked down the hallway all the way back into my office and through the wall, I can hear her blowing up nonstop. She wouldn't stop. And it was like, if you've ever been in an environment like that at home or in business or someplace, it was like a dark mist of a cloud just settled over the entirety of the company that day. There was a spirit of oppression in the office. It was a feeling of a weight and a coming down on you. And I remember thinking, Kim's dangerous. There's something that's not right about her heart. Forgive me, Lord, if I said or did anything that was wrong, but even if I did, that type of response in a business setting, if we worked for a large company, she would have been written up for that type of behavior. It would have been considered an act of aggression. And I remember from that day forward, I had my guard up with her. Well, shortly thereafter, I was in a season where the Lord was talking to me a lot in dreams. The Lord was giving me a lot of dreams in consecutive in various experiences we had. And I remember I had a dream about Kim just very shortly thereafter, within a month or two maybe. And in the dream, she was physically standing in front of me. And I heard the Lord speak to me while I was looking at her. And the only way I can describe it is the voice of the Lord came down and through my back. It was like God was above me and he spoke down into almost through my skull. I felt the voice of the Lord reverberate down, and then it settled into my torso, his voice, and then it came through me. I heard him speak to me, through me. He said, "She has a Jezebel spirit." Now, remember, we had already had the Church 236 experience years before, and then we followed it up with a chaser with the whole South Point experience. And then we kind of took a break. There was a little bit of a break in the action there for about a year where we were looking for a home church in McKinney and there wasn't a lot going on and we were just raising our kids. And suddenly I found myself working for Stewardship Fund in the middle of this 7 years of real estate. And now as I've gotten settled into my job, and now I'm having a spiritual encounter, and now the Lord is talking to me and saying, this is a Jezebel spirit. And this woman and I would work together for the entire time that I was there. Now, she was a professing believer through and through. I mean, up one side and down the other, she claimed she was a Christian. And what I noticed was that there would be conflict with her for periods of time, and then suddenly it was like everything was fine. There was this pendulum that would swing with her emotionally. And she would come in your office and she would just, "Oh, how are you? Oh, would you pray for me? Oh, can I pray for you?" It was this pseudo-Christianese interaction that she would get into a flow with. And I remember thinking, this is weird. One day she's over here on this extreme, and then the next day she's over here on this extreme. This reminds me of my mother. And yet this has a Christian language overlaid over it. Back and forth and back and forth. And you know, when you're empathetic, you want to believe the best about people, and you want to change personally, and you want to help other people to change and grow. Her husband had left her and divorced her and left her broke. He had transferred all the money out of the country into foreign assets, and he ran off with another man, left her with 2 boys to raise on her own. She didn't have a penny. Those types of things tug at your heartstrings. And so you want to believe the best about people, and you want to forgive people if they've offended you or had conflict with you. And that's kind of where I was with it. And so I would go through these periods of time where I would let my guard down with her and, try to give her the benefit of the doubt, because she was having these things happen in her life. And then all of a sudden the conflicts would blow back up again, and then everything would go back to normal, and then conflict would come again, and then everything would go back to normal. Company continued to grow. The company continued to expand because the foreclosure market was just bursting at the seams. Asset managers at banks had more assets than they could handle. Our books were overflowing with properties. Each sales rep was selling about 10 properties a month. In my time there, I sold over 440 properties, I counted. And we brought in another sales rep to handle, and we continued to divide the country up. We lost sales territory. We had to bring in this third guy, and he got part of my area and he got part of the other sales reps area because we had so many properties coming onto our books. And over the course of time, I just noticed that this woman's behavior was always cunning. It was divisive. She would try to get you to let your guard down and confide in her, and she'd ask you questions and how are you doing? And me being 35 years old at the time and still kind of learning about some of these things. And again, this was 20 years ago. I noticed that she started to collect data and information on the sales reps. And then we noticed all collectively that she was going back to the managers of the companies, our 2 immediate supervisors, and reporting back to them on things that we were saying. Like maybe we were frustrated because the pay wasn't really what it needed to be. That's another story. But she would try to get us to confide in her, and as soon as we dropped even the slightest hint of a feeling or an emotion, she would collect that and she would run back to the managers and report to them what we were saying. And we found out that she was doing this. And so as a group, we sort of unionized and we said, no more talking to this woman. We can't have any more conversations with her about the things that are going on in our lives or how we feel about work. We just all collectively at the same time cut her off. Well, also about this time, they brought in a sales manager. When they hired the third sales rep, we brought in a sales manager by the name of John. And John, I loved John. John was a pro. He'd worked for Weyerhaeuser for years and understood corporate management. He understood processes. He understood flow. He understood accountability. He understood professionalism. He was the husband of the CEO's secretary, and that's how we knew him. He was an investor in the company, and he had been laid off by Weyerhaeuser, and he was looking for work and had been unemployed for several months. And so finally one day they just offered him a job to come in and just clean up the system. And John was a friend to the sales guys. He had been a sales rep, he'd been a sales manager, and he understood what it was like to have these types of jobs, and he understood corporate accountability. And so when he came in, and remember, John was not a real strong believer. I don't even know that he was really a Christian. I think he and his wife went to church, but I never really had a sense that he was a strong believer. But he was a man of, like, he had a moral base to him. He was very professional, very white collar. And John came in and he completely took the system apart and assessed it to see where the weaknesses and the strengths were in the company. He went to every single person in the company and interviewed them based on their job, their accountabilities, their workflow, what they needed, what they didn't have, what they did have. And he went and he flow charted the entire financial ecosystem of everything that we had built over the previous probably year and a half, 2 years. And he did an assessment for the investors and for the CEO of the company. And you know what he found? The biggest problem that the company had was Kim. The one conclusion that he came to was that without understanding the whole Jezebel dynamic, without being able to describe it spiritually, he came up with one assessment in the company, actually two. One, you don't pay the sales reps enough. He actually told them that. He said, you need to double their salaries. And he said, two, get rid of her. She's your biggest problem. He said she controls the company because what she does, she got sick one week, didn't show up for work. We couldn't find where she put anything. She didn't have a system that was replicable, that anyone could come in and sit down and take over her job for a week while she went on vacation, where she was sick, where something personal came up. She had bottlenecked the company through her office so that if she didn't show up and log into the computers and turn her keys and operate in her job, the entire company would shut down. And John saw it. And he said, you need to fix that. He said, we have to fix that. Because if we don't fix that, he said, your company, when she chooses, when she decides, this company stops. All the millions of dollars that you guys are taking in investor money and buying all these distressed assets, he said, all of these assets become null and void if she decides that she's going to sit in her office and cross her arms and not do her job. No one knows how she's filed the books away. No one can track anything down. It's all logged into computers under access codes that only she has. He said, this shouldn't be this way. And she set it up that way because this spirit is about two things: gathering information and controlling everything that goes on in the system based on information control. If you talk to Carla Boutron in Texas, she has a huge ministry, her and her husband in Texas, that helps churches get delivered from the Jezebel spirit. And she said there are two things that Jezebel always seeks: positioning and control of information. It wants to gather information and be in a position of authority and decision making. In that way, it can control everything that's going on. And that's exactly what this woman did. This woman that had this spirit, that's exactly what was going on. So time goes on. They realize that they need to get some transparency in her department while they continue to support the sales reps. And they did increase our pay, by the way, thanks to John. And during that time, the Lord gave me another dream about her. And in the dream, it was a continuation of the first dream that I'd had maybe a couple of years before. She physically was standing in front of me in another dream. And this was probably 3 or 4 months before I would resign from the company and go to work for Sam's Club as a manager. In the dream, she appears in front of me. And I looked at her and I said, do you want to be free from this spirit? And she looked back at me and she said, no, I do not. I asked her in the dream, do you want to be free from this spirit, the Jezebel spirit? And she told me, no, she didn't want to let go of it in the dream. So I would end up leaving the company. My time in real estate would fulfill itself. 7 years. I left Stewardship Fund. And before I left it, I warned the CEO of the company, who was the elder at South Point Church. And I warned anyone that would listen to me. I actually think, if I remember correctly, I had this conversation with John. I said, this company is long-term in trouble. It's going to have a lot of dead assets on the books because in these markets like Detroit and some of these other places, you can't move this inventory anymore because the population is in such decline and all of the investment capital has fled these markets and there's no one there to buy these assets. So really what you're doing when you're buying them off of the banks and the brokers is you're just throwing money in the trash. And I said, I would imagine at some point, unless there's a big financial turnaround in the country, that this is going to become a long-term problem for the company. And I remember saying those things to people before I left. Well, I left in end of May, 1st of June of 2008. The Lord promoted me into management with Sam's Club, and then he relocated us to the San Antonio market for another season down there. Won't even get into that. But long story short, a couple of years after that, the Lord would relocate us or move us down to Mexico, and we would have some of our experiences down in Mexico that we had in doing missions work. But what ended up happening was after I left Stewardship Fund, they started dealing not only in the assets of these companies, but they were buying the notes off of the banks, not just the properties themselves. They were buying them with the mortgages in place before they went into formal default. And so they were assuming the notes, not just the properties, but the mortgages that were still active. And in most cases, these people were still in their homes. And so what they started to do is to buy the notes and then season the notes under new interest rates, new mortgage agreements with the existing occupants that were waiting to hear from the banks that were buying their loans. And then they were reinstituting the mortgages at really what turned out to be hard money rates, high interest rates, and then they were packaging them together, and then they were selling them to investors throughout the United States that they knew firsthand. Big money players. Looked like a good deal, and the company went from making a little money to a lot of money in the 2 years after I left. It looked like on the surface I left a really good thing. When I left, not only had our pay been increased, but the sales reps that were left behind when I left, they started making money hand over fist because of the new structure of the company that I just described. So what happened was it looked like I left a really good situation. But in fact, from a long-term perspective, I didn't, because I warned them. I said at some point, the assets that you're purchasing are going to come back to bite you because you're going to become so insolvent on the back end that you're not going to be able to move some of these investor packages at all. You're not going to be able to sell them for returns. And also on top of that, they were still entertaining a Jezebel spirit inside the company. It wasn't just that Kim had a Jezebel spirit that plagued her, but what was happening was this was spiritually affecting the company. Christine and I would move to Mexico in 2010 with Joseph and Joel. Kevin had already graduated from high school. He'd moved back to California to live with his dad for a year and then join the Navy. About 6 months into being in Mexico, this was late 2010, first part of 2011, roughly. I'll have to go back and check that time frame. It was about somewhere around mid-2011. I got an email. From Kim asking for forgiveness for all the things that she had done in the previous years. All of her behavior all of her sin. And as it turned out, from what I was told, Kim had been walking through the parking lot. I think it was a Home Depot. And she slipped and fell, and she broke numerous bones in her body. She was an older woman. She looked like she's probably pushing 60. I say older, forgive me. I'm 55, but she fell in the parking lot and broke several bones in her body, numerous bones from what I was told. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel who calls herself a prophetess. She calls herself a Christian. By her teachings, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and the eating of food sacrificed to idols. I've given her time to repent of her immorality, but she's unwilling. Remember when I had the dream and I looked at her and said, do you want to be free from this spirit? Do you want to repent? And she said no. She was unwilling. So I'll cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely unless they repent of her ways. And I will strike her children dead. Do you know what ended up happening to Stewardship Fund? Not only did she go on a bed of suffering physically, but Stewardship Fund was shut down by the SEC. They all showed up to work one day, and then all of a sudden federal agents walked in the building, took their keys, told everyone to stand. This is what I was told. Okay, this is what I was told. Everyone was told to stand up, back away from their computers, hand over their computers, hand over their keys, and leave the building. That's what I was told. You know what happened to them? All those distressed assets that they couldn't sell? Well, I was told that one of the principals of the company started robbing Peter to pay Paul. They would bring in an investor, and that investor would buy a package of distressed properties and then wait for their returns on those properties. Well, when it came time for scheduled returns, those returns weren't there because they weren't able to sell some of those properties to garner the returns they had contractually agreed to give their investors. So they were taking from other pools of money to pay off those investors. So they weren't keeping investor pool money separated as they should, and instead they were pulling money from other pools and paying off what was coming due. And they got caught. And they got sued, and they got the SEC involved, Securities and Exchange Commission, and they got shut down. What I've noticed, look, they would not fire Kim. And last time I was in Dallas and had checked in with some of the people that worked there, I was told they just gave her an office off to the side, and they quarantined her, but they would never really cut ties with her. For what reason, I do not know or understand. You cannot deal with a Jezebel spirit like that. It doesn't work. The way you deal with a Jezebel spirit is you deal with it the way Jehu dealt with Jezebel. You get in your chariot, you drive like a madman, you go to her palace, you tell the eunuchs in charge of her to throw her out the window, and you run your horses right over her. You do what Jehu did. You can have no mercy on this demon, because the long-term residual impact of this spirit is that it will take down not only the individual that it occupies, but if you continue to tolerate it, nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel. If you continue to tolerate it, look up the word tolerate in English. Just go look up the definition of the word tolerate. It means you give it space. You don't challenge it. You just give it space to run and operate and do its thing. You don't cut ties with it. You let it continue to exist and fester and boil over. If you tolerate it, you get all of the things that I just read in Revelation chapter 2 out of Thyatira, to the church in Thyatira. Nevertheless, I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. She says that she's speaking on behalf of God. She's serving God. She's in her role in obedience to the Lord. No, she's not. She's everything but that. I'll cast her on a bed of suffering. I'll strike her children dead, and I'll make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely unless they repent of her ways. That company had a Jezebel spirit inside of it, and you cannot tolerate that. When the Lord identifies that for you, you get rid of it. You don't let it sit in positions of authority. You don't let it have a position as a head of a ministry in the women's ministry. You ride like a madman in your chariot. You corner it. You rally the troops. You have them cast her down, and you run your horses back and forth over it. You wipe her out. You cannot tolerate Jezebel. It is a witchcraft spirit. It is arguably the strongest demonic principality that you are going to have to contend with in your personal life, if someone around you has it, and or in the ministry in general. It is a divisive spirit. The word Jezebel means without cohabitation, i.e. it divides. Proverbs 6. Pay close attention. Did you know that there are 6 things that the Lord hates? And there are 7 things that are detestable to God. Do you know what they are? Open up to Proverbs 6. There's 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. This is verse 16. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked schemes, feet that are quick to rush into evil, a false witness who pours out lies, and a man who stirs up dissension among brothers. Kim did everything but shed innocent blood. The church story that I'm about to lay down for you that we've been involved in the last year and a half, the women's minister, she's done everything but shed innocent blood. I had to tell you the Stewardship Fund story because 1, it was a training platform for me, and 2, it'll help you to understand what I'm getting ready to tell you happened in the backwoods up here. These AG churches, some of them, they're tolerating Jezebel. The Lord shut that entire company down. He cast that woman on a bed of suffering. Why? Because she did all of the things listed in Proverbs 6. She was the perfect definition of a Jezebel spirit. She was a perfect experience as a training platform to learn how the Jezebel spirit operates. Everything that the Lord started to sow into Christine and I in Church 236 would be fully confirmed at Stewardship Fund. Why? It's training. Why? Because seasons of ministry are coming where, like QA that I mentioned in the previous video, the Lord is positioning apostles and prophets at the back door of the church. He's knocking on the door and he's saying, let me in, because I'm about to I'm going to spiritually scan this whole environment, because there are things going on that I don't like. I don't approve of this, and you need to stop. And he's got words, direct words, that he's giving these pastors, these Pastors that are overseeing these charismatic chaos environments where Jezebel is dwelling. Jezebel loves charismatic chaos. There's no discipline in it. There's no word discipline in it. Jezebel loves charismatic chaos. So Lord's going to put QA at the back door. And he just did that for the last year. I'm going to get to that story. But before we do that, I'm going to explain to you in the next video why these people are not detecting their own sin in these atmospheres. Why is it that the pastors and the elders in these churches are not picking up on their own problems? Why is that? I'm going to talk to you about that spiritual dynamic in the next video.